Hello everybody, welcome to this critique video. Today we're going to be looking at 6 images from the large format photographer Cody Schultz. The photographs that he sent in are from his family farm up in Pennsylvania, and we're going to be talking about the impact that a slow creative process such as large format has on his work. So I've got the images loaded up in Lightroom. Let's go ahead and take a look. A bit of context. Cody provided sort of 2 themes of images here, the first 3 being trees and the second 3 being intimate. We're going to look at the images in the context of their theme, but he's also provided with the file names. If you can look here, he's provided some image titles. So that's another piece of context that adds to the story of the images, as well as that they're, as I said, all made on his family property up in Pennsylvania. So there's a very personal connection here to the images, and even with the dates of the images, we can see that they've been made as early as August in 2019. So it's a long-term project, and that's a really interesting way that Cody is looking to make images. So to quickly run through the titles, the first image here is called Divide. Second image is Forbidden. The Road. Needful Things. Amidst the Chaos. And finally, Lone Warrior. So for me, it's a piece of the puzzle, it's a piece of the story. These are clearly not just images of pretty or beautiful locations. They're about an interaction and a participation of Cody in the landscape. He's having a conversation with the woodland around him and witnessing it as it changes over the years. For instance, these 2 trees look as though they've both fallen over, but the tree behind is still standing tall. So Divide, the title, could be alluding to a number of things, but for me it's about sort of this division of death and life perhaps, and all these creeping vines overtaking the decaying fallen trees. So I mean, could run through each of these titles and come up with any number of backstories, and that's part of the joy that you get from naming something, is that you never know how the viewer is going to interpret that specific title. Could take it in any direction. It can be both a blessing and a curse, I suppose. Forbidden could be taken in different directions as well. This might be a part of the property that Cody was never allowed to go to as a child, for instance, which may not align with this specific edit in my mind. It's quite bright and cheerful, so perhaps there's a different context that Cody has, or a different story that he's trying to tell with this. But yeah, from that perspective, I really like the addition of titles to each of these images. One thing I did notice, if I jump all the way to the end, is that Cody's using large format here, and he hasn't cleaned up the dust on any of these scans or edits. So I would say that typically, I mean, if you're looking to make prints of these, which I know Cody is very interested in the world of print, then you wouldn't necessarily make a print with all of these dust artifacts. In that way, the scan should probably also be clean. That's my take on it anyway. It's a pain sometimes with large format, having shot it a fair bunch myself, but I think it is a necessary evil to get rid of all of those distractions. Another interesting sort of artifact of the fact that Cody's shooting on large format is that a lot of his images, for instance this first one's quite clear, display depth of field, and it's something that maybe in the modern world with focus stacking and digital photography we've become accustomed to wanting front to back sharpness, whereas in Cody's images you often notice the background is soft, and that provides a nice 3-dimensionality and depth to his images that this image, for instance, wouldn't have had he not shot it on large format or at a wider aperture. So that runs throughout his imagery, most notably in this last image as well. It's soft down at the bottom, but the effect of that is to draw focus on the subject, which is, of course, these small leaves here, the lone warrior. And again, through these intimate photographs, we see a nice depth of field where you get that smooth transition from out of focus to in focus, and it really helps to emphasize the subject of the photograph and draw the viewer's attention to what Cody is photographing. Really quick, if you're enjoying the video, then please do consider subscribing to the channel. Back to the critique. So jumping into the actual images themselves, Cody often goes for this dark, almost melancholy look in quite a few of his images. And it is very emotionally evocative, and perhaps a higher contrast edit wouldn't evoke the same emotions. For instance, if I brighten up a lot of these highlights and just bring those darks back down a bit from before to after, I don't think that the high contrast has the same impact in these woodland spaces. On the overcast, foggy kind of weather that Cody is photographing in, the woodland is often very flat, and so creating images or editing in post with images that are fairly flat, you can see here the amount of space before he has whites or blacks, is actually quite fitting with the subject matter. These aren't high contrast scenes natively, so the edit themselves doesn't need to be overhanded in that regard. That being said, he might look to reduce some of these specular highlights up here in the tree canopy. I'm guessing Cody's probably not someone who's going to go and clone those out. I probably wouldn't either. It's something, again, that's natural to the woodland setting. And we'll see both in the second image here, where he's effectively using that open canopy and the fog, and in the third image, to create a sense of the enveloping light. The scene is almost sort of dissolving in light, as Joe Cornish puts it. So from an aesthetic treatment, Cody's doing a really good job here of marrying his editing and his style with the environments that he's photographing. These could almost work as a series if I change the order here to go sort of from very dark. The next one, you get a sense of the transition from the inner spaces of the woodland through the threshold. This is sort of out to a clearing, and then standing in that clearing. So there's a way of sequencing these things where the light of the space, the quality of the atmosphere sort of almost becomes the guiding principles that allows you to form a body of work. So from that perspective, I think Cody's doing something really, really interesting here. And that does start to continue through into his intimate theme, in which the intimacy of this first image is really felt. The viewer feels a sort of like an immediacy with the fern here. And I think part of that is the water droplets. If we didn't have the water droplets sitting on the leaves there, it wouldn't feel like a specific moment. It would just feel like an image of ferns. So the intimate theme of that comes down to not just being close to a subject, it's also about an intimate knowledge of the weather that comes through the woodland, the seasonality of the ferns, and whether they go brown in the autumn and then die off and regrow in the spring. So that all sort of wraps itself up into these images. Again, jumping into the develop module, we can see a very similar tact with the histogram, lots of deep blacks, which is creating this very dramatic, almost graphical image. Personally, I might be tempted to bump up the contrast a little bit. Even that might be too much, but I think for me, it adds a little bit of punch, and again, that immediacy. High contrast sort of grabs your attention, which might be maybe a bit ironic for an intimate scene that's supposed to be gentle and personal. So there's something to play with there. I'm not quite sure what the right answer is. The last two images are maybe perhaps not my two personal favorites from the bunch, but I think they might have a place in a larger body of work. The background woodland here is just a little bit distracting. Obviously, Cody's shooting on 4x5, and so I suspect he is keeping these all the same aspect ratio, but I almost would be tempted to go with something that's more like a 16:9, or just a straight 3:2 crop to eliminate the woodland behind, and maybe even bring in just a touch to get rid of that branch on the right hand side. To me, that brings us into relationship with the ferns, makes the subject clear, without, if I just undo that quickly, without sort of the messiness of the background. I think there's enough detail, enough texture going on in the image already that you don't need the extra space in the background. But again, that's something that Cody's going to have to think about, whether changing aspect ratio is something that he wants to do within the project, which I suspect not. So within the context of the project, I think these style of images where you start to incorporate a few man-made objects are probably quite important, because it shows their family, Cody's family relationship to nature, to the nature surrounding them, to the woodland, etc. So I don't have any problem with including man-made elements here. I think it fits with the project. However, I would say that the balance of this image perhaps is a little bit distracting or off to me. I'm assuming here that the subject, the lone warrior, is the sprouting leaves here on the side of the tree. So tonally, I would probably come in with maybe a linear gradient here. We can, where are we going? Rotate it a bit like that. Bring down some of these highlights, maybe even darken it down a bit, and then create a new brush. I'll zoom in, and I'll just do this really quick and dirty. Would be a lot more precise if I was doing this for a final product. Oops. And I would probably bump this up just a touch to bring in a bit more brightness and contrast. That might be something that Cody could have done with a green filter or a blue filter perhaps, to really try and make these leaves pop a bit more. But from before to after, I think even adding a subtle vignette here, do -10, from before to after, I think draws the viewer's attention to a more balanced relationship between the man-made objects and nature. Whereas before, the tonal balance here with the brightness on this car makes it seem as though the man-made is overpowering nature in some ways. So that's something to consider, and I'm sure you've got a lot of other images that sort of fit into this category. Something to consider about the way that you represent the relationship of tones between nature and man-made, therefore impacts the relationship that the viewer is going to imply between those subjects. So overall, really fun to look at this, and working in a long-term project like this with a place that you know so well is going to be a really fantastic tool to artistic development. And we can see that here with Cody from 4 years ago through to, a few years ago only. And I'm sure Cody's got a lot more work that's more recent. So it's really interesting to see how Cody himself is developing the relationship and conversation with his family property. Thank you so much, Cody, for sending in those fantastic images. I really did enjoy taking a look at them and offering you some critique. Hopefully you've gotten something out of this. And for all of you watching, thank you so much for joining. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.